Hey there, welcome to the latest installment of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and we are covering Dennis Prager's The Rational Bible, Exodus, God, Slavery, and Freedom. Feel free to pick up a copy of that off of Amazon at the affiliate link in my video description. I want to talk to you about the Ten Commandments again today, and one of the things that I have noticed there is a great deal to be gained from reading the Bible out loud. Now, a couple of videos back, I actually read the Ten Commandments out loud. And what I noticed when I was doing that was something that I've never noticed in all the times that I've read the Ten Commandments. And I've read the Bible about 4 times all the way through. And you can really get a different perspective on what is going on in the text when you're actually speaking it. And that's especially true, say, in the New Testament when you're dealing with letters, because letters, those are broken up into chapter and verse, just like everything in the Bible is broken up into chapter and verse. But you have to understand that when the Bible was originally written, there was no chapter and verse numbers. There were no chapter numbers. There were no verse numbers. There wasn't a Genesis 1, Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, or something like that. There were just these scrolls that had writing on them, and maybe there were particular ways that you would write these scrolls in order to preserve the contents, and they had their own sophisticated writing methods that involved kind of like numerical checksums and mnemonics that you could put into the documents to kind of say, okay, make sure you've got the right number of letters and words and all that kind of stuff. It was a very sophisticated system. but the chapter numbers and the verse numbers were implanted much later, and sometimes they were implanted in places that it was really not appropriate to plant them. And things like that will occur, say, in the letters of Paul. I think there's a couple of places where I looked and said, the guy really shouldn't have ended the chapter here. He should have gone maybe a verse or two later, or maybe you should have done it a verse or two earlier. So one of the things to understand about the Bible is that the chapter and verse designations in there are not divinely inspired. that may actually be a shock to some of you out there. You might have thought that these chapter and verse designations were actually divinely inspired, but they're not. There's nothing there that's a later invention. It's a convenient thing, and it's something that has lasted for a long time. Now, getting back to the point, why is all that important? Well, when I was reading through the Ten Commandments, and I was reading them out loud, it all of a sudden struck me that the grouping that I had created for those Ten Commandments was actually wrong. And it's something that Dennis Prager himself brings up. And he also makes note of the fact that if you look at Christianity and how Christianity divvies up the Ten Commandments, you will find that they do it 2 different ways. There is the way that I read to you, which is the way that I was taught. If you look at Catholicism and you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, they do the Ten Commandments a little bit differently. They use mostly the formulation that is in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Now, the part that we're covering today is Exodus chapter 20. But there's 2 places in the Old Testament, in the Torah, where the Ten Commandments come up. And Deuteronomy chapter 5 is the second place. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there are some subtle differences between the Ten Commandments version there and the Ten Commandments version in Exodus chapter 20. And the Catholic Church uses Deuteronomy chapter 5 as its template. So Deuteronomy chapter 5 actually leaves out the stuff about making a graven image and bowing down to that and blah, blah, blah. And it just basically says, you shall have no other gods before me, and then skips pretty much directly to you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. And so if you leave out that commandment from the list that I gave you about the you shall not make any graven images and such, then you're really left with only 9 commandments, unless at the bottom, which is where the Catholics do this, they split the coveting commandment, which is reordered in that case, into you shall not covet your neighbor's wife as one, as the ninth commandment, and then as you shall not covet your neighbor's goods or anything else that belongs to your neighbor as the 10th commandment. So that's how they get 10 commandments as opposed to the 10 commandments from Exodus 10, which does have that graven image one. But as I'm reading through this, I'm realizing that the second commandment, if left to itself, winds up making no sense. And let me explain. The second commandment starts off saying, you shall not make a sculptured image of anything that is in the heavens above or on the earth below or on the waters under the earth. So it appears to be forbidding any kind of sculptured image of anything in nature or in the supernatural. And then it says you won't bow down to worship it, and so on and so on. But that bare commandment right there at the front seems to say, you're not going to make any sculptures of anything like, angels or devils or anything on earth or anything at all. Is that true? Well, actually, no, because in the book of Exodus, going forward, when God is giving Moses the instructions for what the Ark of the Tabernacle is going to look like, and the Ark is going to hold these 10 commandments inside of it, the Ark actually has these angels, these cherubim, that are sculpted, and they're part of the lid of the Ark. So you have this obvious contradiction in Scripture that says, do not make a sculptured image, and then later on, I want you to make a sculptured image. Don't make a sculptured image of these anything that's in the heavens above, like, say, angels. Oh, and by the way, when you're making the lid of the ark, I want you to sculpt these angels. That makes no sense. That's a total contradiction. Unless you understand that the preceding verse, which says, you shall have no other gods besides me, is the governing principle to which that you shall not make a sculptured image verse applies. That you shall not have any gods besides me, which I gave to you as the first commandment, and you shall not make a sculptured image of anything that's in the heavens above or on the earth below or underneath, which is I presented to you as the second commandment. All of that is actually one commandment. And that's something that is actually reflected in Deuteronomy, which leaves out the sculptured image part, because the sculptured image part is kind of a sub-explanation of the you shall not have any gods besides me. So it was kind of superfluous. They didn't need to repeat it again. Now, when you understand that, then you realize, oh my gosh, there's really only 9 commandments. Because you shall not make a graven image or sculptured image of anything in the heavens, etc. That's kind of an explanatory portion of you shall not have any other gods besides me. That all goes together. And so what you're left with after that are just 8 commandments. So where is the 10th? Now, the Catholics solve for this by saying, yes, we know that, the first and second commandments, as traditionally understood, are actually one commandment, and so we present them as such. It's just, you shall have no other gods besides me. We're just going to pay attention to that part. And we'll call that the first commandment, and then we'll have the 9 more under that. But they split the covetous commandment, you shall not covet, into 2 commandments. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and they make that one commandment. And then they make that, the rest of it, you shall not covet your neighbor's house or land or property or etc., as a separate commandment. But Exodus 20 doesn't do that. That's strictly a Deuteronomy 5 construction. Exodus 20, you can't do that because in that case, the wife doesn't come first. It actually says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his maidservant or manservant, or his ox or his donkey, or anything else that is your neighbor. The wife comes second in the sequence. The house comes first. So that's really all one commandment also. I think it's a mistake on the Catholic side to split it up. And I think the reason that house comes first in Exodus 20 is because house can have multiple meanings. When you say house, I mean, you want to think of the Game of Thrones. Think of House Stark, House Lannister, House Dorne. Any of those houses. Your neighbor has a household. Your neighbor has a sphere of possessions that you can rightly call his house. And just as in the first commandment, where you've got this, you shall not have any gods beside me, and then you've got the explanatory part about the sculptured image, Exodus 20 does the same thing with the covetous amendment. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. And that means anything that your neighbor possesses. The sum totality of your neighbor's possessions. That's your neighbor's house. And then it explains and goes so far as to say your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's maidservant or manservant, your neighbor's ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So it's the house, and then here's what constitutes the house. But that leaves you with only 9 commandments in Exodus 20. Now, as it happens, the 10 commandments, according to the Jews, are actually the 10 statements, or the 10 words. So, the way we get to 10, which 10 being this, mystically significant number, 7 plus 3, 7 being the divine number, 3 being, at least in Christianity, from a Trinitarian sense, you've got 3 as a very significant number. But the way you keep the 10 in Judaism is to say that first statement, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the house of bondage, the house of Egypt, is a statement in and of itself along with the other statements. So if you interpret the 10 commandments to be 10 statements or 10 words, which, the 10 commandments are often referred to as the Decalogue, which means the 10 words, then God's declaration of his identity there, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, that is a statement of God's identity, and that is the first of the 10 statements. The last 9 of which statements are the commandments. So there's still 10 commandments or 10 statements, and according to Dennis Prager, they do interpret that first statement, which doesn't actually command anything, but they do interpret that statement as being a kind of command in saying that this commands you to believe that there is a God, and that there is that this God is the one who specifically led you out of Egypt and out of slavery. So there is an implied command in that statement, and therefore it is the first commandment in a sense. So all of that is to kind of say that, even something as simple as the 10 Commandments can actually be kind of a mess when you get to how people have interpreted them over time and how people have, tried to group them together to keep the numbering right. I mean, to me, it's one statement and it's 9 commandments. But, your denomination may vary. I'm Mike Partika, and thank you for taking this little journey through the very confusing kinds of differences that can arise when there's not a ton of clarity, and also when there are multiple versions of the same thing in Scripture. That doesn't tend to help much sometimes. And anyway, this has been the latest edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. I hope you join me for the next one. Please do subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next one comes up. And pick up Dennis Prager's The Rational Bible, Exodus, God, Slavery, and Freedom at the affiliate link in the video description. And hope to see you in the next video. I will talk to you later.